Melancholy music fills the cobwebbed corridors of the old mansion. The strains of a Fandom melody seep into each musty corner of the hulking edifice. It is a strange song indeed, for this music means there is terror at Collinwood. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am your hostess, Danielle, aka Penny Dreadful, and I just want to tell you about some interesting things happening before we get to today's show. Bleak Sunday is coming this Sunday, October 30th, the second annual Bleak Sunday, and this is a gathering of YouTube channels spearheaded by my friend Raymond Castile of Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror, and several YouTube channels will be providing spooky content for Halloween, including the Terror at Collinwood YouTube channel. I have a fun video coming your way on the Terror at Collinwood channel, and so check out Bleak Sunday. There will be links to all of the channels participating in Bleak Sunday, a playlist link that once I have that, I will add it to the YouTube video, and I hope you will enjoy it. And so that'll be coming on Sunday, October 30th, 2022. In addition, there's also the Shilling Shockers Halloween special, my horror movie host show that I hosted for 10 years, but our regular series is no longer running on television, but we do release a Halloween special every year on our Vimeo channel, and this year I am hosting The Ape, starring Boris Karloff, so be sure to check that out. I will post a link to the Shilling Shockers Vimeo channel, and that will be released probably on Halloween Day. And also, there, of course, is going to be a Terror at Collinwood Halloween episode, which will be coming either on Friday, October 28th, or on Saturday, October 29th, 2022. You definitely don't want to miss that one. I don't want to spoil the surprise on that one, but let's just say it's going to be a really fun and appropriate episode for Halloween. Lots of good stuff happening in that one, so stay tuned for that. And also, just a couple of quick points about this episode specifically that you're going to listen to here with my guest Ben Alba. During the course of this episode, you're going to hear Ben play some bars from Robert Cobert's Dark Shadows music, just briefly. And so the way to make this work is so that he could quickly alternate between talking into the microphone and playing on his keyboard was to set up this kind of cramped camera audio keyboard setup so that he could go back and forth. He did an amazing job kind of bouncing back and forth, and I plussed up the audio a little bit on the audio version of this podcast so you could hear a little bit better some of the background chords that he was playing there. And the other point I wanted to mention was that I do not have the rights to Robert Cobert's Dark Shadows scores, so some fans may be wondering, well, why isn't she adding in the music that they're talking about? So to sort of make this work, Ben came up with a great idea that he would play just a few bars of any given musical piece that we discuss, so that we could illustrate what we're talking about. So he doesn't play the entire song, although he certainly could. He's a very talented musician, but he just played a little bit of it so that we could get a taste of it. And I did mention the audio version of this episode, which gives you the clue that there is also a video version of this particular episode. So if you head on over to the Terror at Collinwood YouTube channel, you can also watch the video version of this episode to watch us discuss Robert Cobert's Dark Shadows music and watch Ben play on the keyboard. So, and please do be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and to the audio feeds for Terror at Collinwood. And without further ado, let's get to the show. Be careful, my friend, where you tread, for I warn you now, there are spoilers ahead. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. 'Tis I, your hostess, Penny Dreadful, aka Danielle, and I am thrilled and ecstatic to have my guest here today because this is going to be such a fun episode. I can tell. We were just chit-chatting before the show, and it's going to be a really good time. I am joined by Ben Alba, Ben is the director of academic success at DePaul University of Law and author of Inventing Late Night, Steve Allen and the Original Tonight Show. He is a longtime Dark Shadows fan with a strong love for the atmospheric music composed for the series by Robert Cobert. Ben is also a musician and even performed in an impromptu piano bar performance in the hotel lobby at one of the Dark Shadows festivals, where he took requests from Dark Shadows themes from fans who gathered around the grand piano. Ben is joining me today to discuss some of our favorite Bob Cobert Dark Shadows themes. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Well, thank you, Penny. Thank you, Danielle. And I never realized that all these years later, that fateful piano bar requestathon would still live on. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I was reading Bob Issel's great book, Our Shadowed Past, which
Oh, it is.
yeah, it's fantastic, and we both have chapters in that book. And I was reading your entry, and I was just really taken by your enthusiasm and passion for Robert Cobert's music, and it's just I said, well, I got to reach out to him and ask him to join me for a Bob Cobert celebration here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a musicologist, but I'm a musician. I'm a music aficionado, and I've listened to the music of Dark Shadows. I didn't really study it as a scholar, but you internalize it after you hear it year after year after year. And and when you first hear it as a part of the television show, it grabbed me. I mean, it seemed like it was another character on the show that permeated all of the storylines. It was the character you never saw, but was definitely helping to shape the atmosphere and define it. And I think it really is one of the hallmarks of the brilliance of that show.
Absolutely. One of the things you said in your article that really grabbed me was that you used to imagine, like, certain periods of your life
Yeah.
with the dark shadows, different themes, like underscoring.
It was really funny. It was almost like a game I would play with myself, and just that, I'd be walking down the street and I'm thinking, what mood am I in? And then, would I want to think of maybe, so maybe I feel kind of somber if I was doing that. Or there'd be other, the other things there that I could think about that Colbert really wrote a whole span of emotions and moods, and he could evoke lush, gothic, elegant, full cinematic. But then he could also bring you into a little bar with a rock combo from the 60s. So it just everything about what he did at the time was something that just kind of stuck with me. And it would be fun. I mean, if I were kind of feeling a little down one day and I would just hear that music, I go, oh, this is a fun thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love it. How did you first discover Dark Shadows, Ben?
Well, it was, I think, as many fans from the 60s did, it was just one of those things that happened to pop up that I noticed. It was kind of maybe in the mid run of the series, so around late 1968. And I just happened to notice it when I had come home from school. And so many different things grabbed me about it. I think around that time, they must have been in was it the Atom storyline somewhere around there, and between Barnabas and Julia Hoffman, who was really one of my favorite characters, and Professor Stokes and Willie Loomis, I think that's when they were all kind of allies with each other. So I never knew about the darker past prior to 1968 until many years later, but it was when I was in, I think, sixth grade when I was first discovering the show. And so I don't know if I could, if I was really one of those that ran home to catch it from school, but I certainly made sure that I watched it, and I was, really glued to it at that time.
Fantastic. And then you discovered the fandom later and started attending the Dark Shadows festivals?
Yeah, yeah, that really wasn't until the 90s. I think that I've been in many ways kind of a solitary fan until I got online, and then I began to notice the Dark Shadows groups. I think there was one great group, Dark Shadows Forums, and
Yes.
and then they were also attending the first convention that I attended was actually in 2002 at the World Trade Center, which was 3 weeks before it became no more, sadly.
Yeah.
But that was the first convention, and I was able to meet a number of the stars there, and it was really quite a wonderful group to be around. Everybody sharing that kind of passion and interest in the show, and then in the people that the actors and the production team that really made it what it became.
Yeah, yeah. It's I would love for them to do something again, some event like that at some point. Just a new celebration of Dark Shadows for the fans to be able to attend, so that we can have another piano bar performance by Ben here. So we have Robert Cobert was, as you describe it, is just he had his themes had such character. It was spooky and melancholy, but could also do the rock music, like those great surf tunes. In fact, I used to host a radio show. I used to DJ a college radio show, and part of what I played like some '60s garage rock and surf rock too, and I would mix in Blue Whale themes
Oh, yeah.
into I would just slot them
It,
in.
it would fit right in there. And, I don't think there were really that many composers of that age that could pull it off. I think Henry Mancini was certainly one that had spanned a wide range of styles. And Dave Grusin is another, and he went on to score a lot of movies too. So I think, Bob Cobert probably is maybe under-recognized for that ability. But, to have one guy being able to evoke all these different moods and with such character, I think was a huge accomplishment.
Oh, for sure. And then you have like dance hall music for Pansy Faye, which he pulled out of his the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And of
Oh,
course
yeah.
he worked with Dan Curtis. He was a frequent collaborator of Curtis's, and you know not only with Dark Shadows, but also things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. All of
Mhm.
Curtis's horror output, I think, was Bob Cobert trilogy of terror, the Night Stalker TV movies, the two of them.
And Winds of War,
Oh, of course, and
too.
yeah, and then Winds of War, War and Remembrance. I mean, it just the list goes on and on. He did, the Turn of the Screw, and um, I mean, it just at Dracula. There's another one that's
Well, the horror stuff that he did, I think, especially in the early and mid 70s, you could tell even if it wasn't Dark Shadows, and even if you didn't know that Dan Curtis was behind it, but you hear the music, and then you go, Bob Cobert, then maybe Dan Curtis can't be far.
Yes, yeah, yeah, it's very distinct, and then he came back, to do the, 91 Revival series
Right.
as well, yeah, and so, but our focus here, we're gonna be talking about, Bob's Dark Shadows music, and we kind of put together, lists, we put together kind of a list of our favorite themes from, Dark Shadows that Bob Cobert did, and there were, quite a few albums for Dark Shadows released. Of course, there's the iconic one, which I have the LP in the other room, but it's this one here, which was reached number 18 on Billboard's top 200 album chart. It's the original music from Dark Shadows, and of course Quentin's theme, which version of that was done by Charles Randolph Grion, and that was number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. Quentin's theme is still something you hear, periodically. You'll be somewhere and you'll hear Quentin's theme show up. Oh,
Let's see. So anyway, that's just a few. I'm trying to turn around and play this thing here, but that became so hot of a song and such a big hit single in I think it was what the summer of 1969
yeah.
that it really attracted a lot of attention, and I think because I think the show was at its peak
Yeah.
around then that
Yes.
that it really was a big record, and I think that helped propel the soundtrack,
Mhm.
which I think everybody that I knew had.
Yeah.
Uh, and I even have a log from, uh, believe it or not, I had a log of my allowance money And I remember, I think it was in July, mid-July or so of 1969 that I paid, I don't know if it was 269 or 369 for the Dark Shadows LP, of my own money.
Do you still have your LP?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's right back there in the record cabinet.
I love it. Oh, great. Wonderful. Yeah, it's so funny to think that, I mean, that Quentin's theme originated also in Curtis's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the background. It was a background tune. And then Curtis wanted Cobert to create a theme for this new ghost that he was introducing to the show. And Cobert said, well, what about this theme I did for Jekyll and Hyde? And it's such a melancholy, sad, and haunting tune. And it's funny that became such a huge hit, considering it's like, you know, Quentin is using this music to possess these two children and compel them to do terrible things. And it's like, wow, this is wild, but it's such a beautiful song.
And the funny thing is that it certainly was not a commercial kind of tune that you'd put on records in the late 60s. It certainly
Mhm,
wasn't up there with the Beatles or with any of the other big groups at the time, but yet because of the show and the show's popularity, and because it was distinctive in its own way, even if it wasn't a rock song,
yeah.
it still captured a lot of the public's attention, and it really became a huge hit. And plus, it got all these different variations of it being played
Mhm.
on the show. Every time that you were evoking Quentin, and the theme would just sort of mysteriously appear. Uh,
Yes.
you'd hear it there, and so I think it was a great plug for the record.
For sure. Oh,
Genius.
100%. Yes. Yeah. Now my go-to for when we talk about these themes tends to be the original album, but also the Media Sound Records releases, which in the late 80s, and I think even into the early 90s, but I think it was more in the late 80s, Media Sound Records released volume 2 of the original music from Dark Shadows. They did volume 3, volume 4. They put out 4 volumes. Then there was another later on, a 30th anniversary release album.
Well, you
Uh,
certainly didn't miss any of them. I don't have, I think I have maybe a couple of them, but not the volumes 2, 3, and 4. Those would really be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, they contain the music that's in this gigantic soundtrack collection, which you can still get the Dark
Hmm.
Shadows soundtrack music collection. It's the complete library. And this is great, but the way it's structured, it's just very much just a catalog of all the has like the name of the instruments or just Angelique Spook, like it just he Cobert's names for the themes, whereas the Media Sound Records releases were curated by fans who kind of put together, named each of the tracks and things like, for example, Guy Haynes, who's a very
Oh, sure.
what beloved
No
Dark
doubt.
Shadows, and he named the track Naomi's Suicide, like he Cobert, Bob Cobert, I believe, consulted on all of that on the release of those Media Sound Records as well. So I really, those kind of tend to be my go-to. And then of course there's also the House and Night of Dark
Oh, right.
Shadows set, which is great.
And some
um
some of those are variations or maybe different orchestrations of familiar Dark Shadows themes.
Indeed, yes, yeah, yep. So yeah, some very recognizable themes in there, but they're, yeah, new versions, like the main title theme in House of Dark Shadows. There's something
Yeah.
even more, I don't know, scary, I guess, about it, the way it sounds in House of Dark Shadows, and then they add that little raven crow sound at the end of in the title. And then of course there's the 91 series
Oh,
as
right.
well, that
Mhm.
they released that. So let's talk about our favorite themes. I did like a top 10, so I can start, or you want to kick it off with
Uh,
with
Feel
yours?
free.
Okay. I picked for my number 10. It was a toss up. Um, I realized after I wrote my list that I hadn't included any blue whale themes, and I said, how is that possible? I have to have a blue whale theme. And then I was torn between number one at the blue whale, which is beautiful, and also dancing at the blue whale, which I also love. And it's a very I went with that one because it's just a kind of a rock and surf tune. I really like the it's the dun 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 dun
Oh,
dun
that right.
dun
That's right.
dun. But number one at the Blue Whale is such a beautiful tune
Yeah, that's.
too.
I think that one is the one that's. Let's see. Uh, is that the one?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that's it.
And that really has that really pretty slow dance feel
It
to it.
does.
And then one of mine is this. That, and so that
I
really has
couldn't
that
help
kind
but
of go-go
dance when you
beat.
were playing that, Ben. I'm
Yeah. Well, I love watching Nancy Barrett dance. I think she was the best dancer in the cast. And so when
yes.
they would have her at the Blue Whale dancing to something like that, it really worked out well. And when my partner and I watch the shows on DVD, we always kind of giggle at some of the background dancers that are kind of, I don't know where they pulled them from, but they were kind of a little bit stiff compared to Nancy and whoever her partner was at the time on camera. But it just is. It's a fun scene, and that kind of music worked. And that's the kind of music where musically speaking, you could just put a guitar chord chart there, and the band would be able to play that, and that would be typical of that era. Whereas with the more cinematic kinds of stuff that Bob Cobert did, uh, that's something where the melodies are very they don't really follow a natural path, and they kind of the intervals are kind of weird, where the way they jump around, and yet he manages to make them all very elegant, very lush, uh, and it's a real talent to be able to evoke something like that with something that's really very disturbing in many ways. Just the kinds of moods that he was able to evoke.
Oh yeah, and some of the just the sounds are sort of discordant, and when it goes on into like 1970, especially when we go into parallel time and into the summer 1970, there's some that he implements a lot, starts using a lot more like theremin and strange kind of ethereal sounds in the 1970s stuff. So he started infusing more styles into the show even as it went on.
Well, I think just the fact that he used a theremin, that he opted for that instrument there for the theme of the show,
Oh yeah,
that was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, television theme song to use a theremin. And that type of an instrument, it's I think, inherently kind of spooky because there's no contact between the person's body and the instrument, so that in some ways the sound is just a little bit unsteady, which gives it that spookiness.
yeah,
Uh, and I think the other song at the time that actually was a pop hit was Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, and that had a theremin in there, so you can hear that kind of
yeah,
sound to it that
yeah.
really made it added to the character.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And the title theme, I wrote this down too. I was doing some research on the title theme was created by using a theremin, a harp, an alto flute, a double bass, and a vibraphone. So it's a great combination to elicit spine tingling feeling and goosebumps, I think.
Yeah, so it's not just the music itself, but just the way it was orchestrated and
Mm,
the kinds of instruments that he thought would combine to make that sound.
yeah.
I think was also part of the genius. And in some ways, I was just thinking, Brian Wilson would be doing that kind of stuff when he was doing Pet Sounds. These rather unusual combinations to get this, unique textures so full of character
Yeah.
going on at around the same time. But like with Bob Cobert, that I think it was A Darkness at Collinwood. I think that's what I was playing, where it was, this. Whoops, let's put the string. This sound here, which is one of my favorite ones. But just look at the way it progresses here.
Yeah.
You know, and really all those notes are like four notes, half a step away from each other. And if you play them all together at the same time, that's the really disturbing part. But yet,
Yeah.
you spread them out, and there's something it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
lush, but it's disturbing, and I
And
think that's really I think the key. The other one, I think this is just called Collinwood, which is the theme under My Name is Victoria
oh
Winter.
yeah, that yes.
I mean, there are not very many notes on here, but it's all there's no nice harmonic there. It's all kind of disturbing intervals
Yeah.
going into it. And it's funny, when I play that, I was thinking, what pop song does that remind me of? And it's sort of like the dark version of On a Clear Day, You Can See
Oh,
Forever.
yeah.
Kind of has that ring. I
Wow.
said, how did that sound arise?
Yeah.
But again, it's very, very interesting.
But talk about, I mean, and they played that Collinwood theme in every single episode, and talk about Gothic atmosphere that sets the mood perfectly for a Gothic show. I mean, it just gets you right into that world, and there's something eerie and a little scary about it. It just creates that somber mood, the
And
supernatural.
and it was and this really, the other thing to put this all into perspective was just, not only are we talking about something orchestrated, but orchestrated on what was considered at the time a soap.
Mhm.
And up until then, really the main accompaniment for soaps was just organ,
Yeah.
and that would be it. I mean, and so it really could be rather limiting in terms of what kinds of emotions or moods. So it was really mainly melodramatic kinds of stuff that you would have on for that kind of accompaniment. So Bob Cobert, I'm not sure exactly, and I don't know if there's history written about it with Dan Curtis, but somebody had to decide that we're going to have to make this appear and sound different. And I can't imagine that it would be cheap to have what had to have been at least a 30-piece, if not greater, orchestra
Mhm.
at your disposal. And it's nice that, obviously they weren't performing it live on the air, but even just to tape all of that and to have an orchestra available to record all of that music, I think was, something that it really was not a low budget aspect of the show. I mean, the sets falling down might be kind of betray a low budget, but the music and the care and the professionalism that went into that, and the artistry, I think that I don't think they really spared the expense on that.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I've tried to convey that before. It was very unusual and probably unheard of, even to have a full orchestral score for a daytime soap opera, I mean, Dan Curtis went into it with a very different take on what he was going to do. I mean, he originally pitched this as a primetime series, and I think he was carrying a lot of his ideas of what he wanted to do. And we're doing it in daytime, but I'm still going to do it the way I want to do it. So, and Dark Shadows was, in comparison to other daytime series at that time, it was an expensive show to produce, even with the sets falling down and stuff. It's just they couldn't go back and edit. They only had that very limited time to use in the studio, and the editing machines were it was expensive and took time to do the editing. So
Yeah,
as
I think when we look back on it, and maybe when people look at it through a contemporary lens, it may seem kind of low budget, but really, as you've been saying, not every aspect of it was low budget, and there were a lot of things that they did spend the money on, but they were able to be as ambitious as they could for their time,
Mhm.
which I think was pretty impressive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, another theme that springs to mind, that's pretty well. You mentioned a couple of that are definitely on the number one I had on my list was the Dark Shadows title theme. You want to give that a whirl on your, on your keyboard?
Um, yeah, from so. So
What? Why?
this is what happens when you're grading 150 student papers that have nothing to do with music up
Yeah.
until like right before taping time. But
Yes, I can
hopefully we
relate. And
evoked a little bit of the theme here.
I thought you have twice as many essays to grade as I'm currently facing a stack of 60 essays. So you have me beat, and you also have my sympathy.
It's really funny when when you think about it that you were introducing me at the beginning and all these things that people must be wondering, well, what does this have to do with Dark Shadows? But I think that's the story of everybody that's
Mhm.
a fan, is that we have different kinds of lives, and somehow this is kind of our other world.
Yeah, yes. And it kind of, I went I was at Seaview Terrace a few weeks back at one of the gatherings there. And it's just, you meet people from all over the country with all kinds of different, stories to tell, different backgrounds. And we're all united by this passion for Dark Shadows. So it was
Yeah.
really cool to experience that. The theme song I was speaking of, Mikey Plague was there. He is a musician and from Queens, and we're talking about what covers of the Dark Shadow, like rock covers of the Dark Shadows theme, and he said, "Why hasn't anybody done a surf cover of the Dark Shadows theme?" And I said, "Gee, that would make, because of the waves and everything crashing, and it's
Yeah.
set on a coat. If you're in a surf band, especially horror surf, I know that's a scene. If you're listening." Do a Dark Shadows cover of a surf cover and send it my way. I will use it as the theme song for Terror at Collinwood. I think that would be great.
I can almost hear the voice of Elizabeth Collins saying, "The sea is my grave. My
Yes,
grave is the sea."
yes. Oh, I could. Oh, that would be perfect to
Yeah.
sort of include like that refrain in there.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness, that would be amazing. So one other thing, Colbert loved to. I'm just going to kind of jump around on on what I have here, but one of the
Oh,
other
sure.
things Colbert was great at was creating these tinkling sort of sound. Like we have, of course, Josette's music box, which is
Yeah.
probably,
Well,
you know,
then, yeah, this one is always a fun to hear. Yeah. That's one that got played so many times that I think that at some point it was just like they're playing it again,
yeah,
and
yes.
and but it was that was always a fun thing, and you'd always see poor Maggie opening that music box and just being fixated uh,
Mhm.
by all of that, and I'm almost in a way surprised that that was not released as a single
Oh, I
at the
think it
time.
was. Oh,
Oh, was
or
it?
Grion, Charles Randolph Grion did a
Oh,
version of it. Yes, yeah. And it's with Josette's music box. Those early Barnabas episodes, it was a similar but different theme, and it was
right.
Farnon Dramatics, or I think it's called.
Hmm.
Is it Robert Farnon? I can't remember his first. I know it's Farnon,
Right.
and you
No,
can
I
find
remember
it.
that first one.
Yes,
I'm trying to remember. Do you know how or why that got changed to the one that I just played?
I think it was so that they wouldn't have to keep paying the rights to use it, because Cobert didn't create that theme, and I think
Oh, right. Okay.
from what I understand, Dan Curtis wanted to kind of own. It was just
Mhm.
cheaper to have Colbert do it and then just use that over and over again instead of always
Right.
using the Farnon music. It's similar. Some fans prefer the original version of it, the original arrangement of it. And I love both versions. I think they both work very well. And then Colbert did some really interesting stuff with his Josette's theme later, where
Mhm.
in the album they call it, in the volume 2 of the album, I think they call it Josette's Room. And then he included some very ethereal, ghostly, sad sort of sounds where it becomes very dissonant, and it just kind of I'm not a musician, so I can't really describe, but it just kind of starts echoing, and it becomes very eerie, and
I
you
think I
hear.
remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, he did some really interesting stuff with it. So we have that, and another sort of tinkly tune that I really like is the playroom theme, the Gerard's
All right.
Carousel, which is very there's something about this, like this little carousel spinning around and playing this innocent theme music, but this tinkly little child's song, but it's like this corrupted innocence, this sense of
Hmm.
corrupted innocence you get from this thing. And then they start he infuses these, I don't know if it's a vibraphone or something, but almost, or like it almost sounds like human voices like echoing. You know what I'm talking about when
Yeah,
it's
I
playing?
remember that. I haven't heard that for a while, but again, there
Hmm.
was something that was on the one hand innocent, but then disturbing.
Yeah,
So again, he achieves that, that balance between the two that really makes for such great character of that theme.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. What are some of your other favorite themes?
I don't know if this is a theme, but this is certainly the beginning of a theme. Every time, and sometimes they would want to emphasize just how horrific or how serious or how alarming something was. And I always remembered this chord that you'd always hear three times. You know,
Yes,
that
I
one.
love it.
I always call that to myself the fire alarm. Because
Oh, I
of that.
love
But
it.
it's always when something suddenly happens that is a big shock.
Yeah.
So you would have that. So that was certainly one. Um, and then we talked about Shadows of the Night, and that got covered by everybody from Henry Mancini to Andy Williams
Mhm.
on one of his albums, and so that was one.
Oh, I
Uh,
love Quentin's theme.
Another one was just the very beginning, and there was nothing that was dissonant about this one, but it's just this one chord at the beginning of "When I Am Dead, My Dearest," and so
Oh
it's
yeah,
really pretty,
it is pretty.
that, and whenever you would hear something like that, and there were other chords that were similar to it, uh, you knew just from the mood that it was evoking that there was nothing threatening that was about to happen. It was almost like, you can kind of breathe easy for a while because the music is telling us that it's calming, it's tranquil, or it's romantic.
Yeah.
Oftentimes if it was a scene with Maggie and Joe,
Hmm.
you'd have something like that going on in the background. Whereas with other more disturbing parts or things that have more suspense, then you'd have the appropriate kind of music for that.
Yeah, and it's important to have. I mean, when you're watching the show, or even any kind of movie in that genre, and the sort of gothic genre, having those moments of tranquility helps to sort of relieve the tension. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna. This is nice now. It's just it's a nice feeling to have that in the mix for sure.
And then all of a sudden you'd get kind of like, you know, something like
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
that's almost what I call uh-oh,
yeah,
kind of music.
yes.
It's like something, oh, now there's something that's going to happen that
Hmm.
we have to be aware of. Chris Jennings walks into the room and notices the time, on the
Yes, yeah.
clock or something like that. So it would always be like, what's going to happen? What does Bob Cobert want us to know, and how much does he want to reveal or hold back on?
Mhm.
So you can really control that with the way the music is set up.
Sure.
I'd always wondered, and I don't know if you knew, um, was the music mixed in after production, after, or did the actors actually hear that
Um, they they
set?
they put it in live while the show was being recorded.
Mm,
I don't know if the actors could hear it. They were doing it up in the booth, I believe,
mm,
and was it Sybil Weinberger? I think it was. I want to say it
hmm.
was Sybil Weinberger was playing it live on these records
Wow.
on
I
these
mean, can you imagine how tricky that had to be?
Oh gosh, I can't even imagine. Yeah,
I
because and
always,
sometimes you hear it if you're listening to sometimes the episodes, it'll drop into the wrong track sometimes for a second, and then they'll
Mhm.
switch it. Occasionally, that
Yeah,
something like that will happen. Yeah.
kind of fun to hear or notice that because sometimes there would be yeah, I think they would drop into the track um, maybe a few seconds before it was supposed to play, and then I guess it must have been somebody just picked up the needle right away
Mhm.
uh, before they would try it again. And I
Yeah.
always remember there was one other scene. this had to be a blooper where I think Julia was trying to peer behind some bushes and they had some kind of music cue at the very end, but then the bushes snapped back in front of her and she had to do it again, to clear the way out. And I think the music kept on going to kind of
Yeah.
cover for that. And I
Yeah.
was thinking, oh my gosh, I guess they just, Dan said it's just going to go in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way. And it just makes me admire all the actors for, their fortitude for being able to kind of just say, this is it. I'm just going to give it my best. And they turned out some fantastic performances given all the limitations that they were confronted with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now another theme that I love too, I mentioned it early on, it was Pansy's theme. It's
Oh, yeah.
so different from anything you hear on Dark Shadows. It's just such a festive, fun, upbeat. But then, he of course Colbert does something spooky with it when she's going into her trance, her psychic trance. Then it gets, and he does some sad stuff with it. There's a sadness to Pansy as well, but there's also a really fun, upbeat aspect to that.
You're not talking about I Want to Dance
Oh
with You.
yes, yes.
Oh, that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, that one, I know I did that probably, what, 20 years ago at that
Yeah, I'm
infamous
sure that was one
piano
of the top
bar
requests.
thing. That's the one, right? That
Yeah.
you're.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There were many variations of that, and
Hmm.
I guess she never missed an opportunity to be able to reprise it or to perform it in some way. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that was one thing that Bob Cobert could capture was that there was a certain uh, feel to the music at the turn of the 20th century
Mhm.
uh, that between Quentin's theme and I Want to Dance with You, that he was able to kind of capture that as well. There was something that was festive, but it wasn't ragtime, but it had kind of that feeling of it was from another era, but not that far removed from the 20th century.
Right. Yeah.
So
That late Victorian era, late
mhm.
19th century, turn of the century. Absolutely. And he just, I mean, he tapped into that perfectly. Um, Another theme that I think doesn't get enough credit, and I mentioned this when I was doing the parallel time episode, is the Ode to Angelique, which I think is a
Oh yeah.
beautiful, beautiful theme.
Um, and I'm just doing this sideways here, but I mean, you're talking about, and I think he does these chords, something like that
Yeah. Yeah.
there. And I know that who was that played it? Was that Aristide? Somebody?
It
Oh,
was Michael.
Bruno.
It
Yeah,
was Michael
I keep
Stroke
on.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we always loved how I think they had him really kind of uh, lean backwards and to the side, as he was playing it. But it was such a fun thing to watch,
Yeah.
uh, very entertaining.
Oh yeah, he really he really
Mhm.
leaned into it, like it was great. He was very passionate about playing the Ode to Angelique.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. There's the piano version, there's also the tinkly, magical, strange version which you hear when Barnabas first opens the door to the parallel time, when Angelique's room, it's playing sometimes in there.
All right.
But yeah, that's a great theme as well. Now our time bands, Angelique also had, Barnabas and Angelique had their own kind of themes as well.
Mhm.
In the volume 2 of the Media Sound Records releases, they just combined the two and they called it Barnabas and Angelique.
Mm.
And it's on this album here.
Mm.
Yeah, it's number gosh, which one is it? Number 16 on this one. But they took anytime it's basically Angelique's spell casting music when she's casting a spell and you hear that it's I can't
All right.
replicate it, but it's that spell casting theme.
Mhm.
But it just immediately when I think a witch casting a spell, that's where my brain
That's
goes
the
to.
perfect underscore for that.
It
Yeah.
really is. It's just it.
It's just like the dream sequence
Mhm.
theme. You always know that they're going to go into that, as soon as
Yes.
you hear it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It has a spinning quality to it, and I think the same thing with with the angelique spellcasting
Hmm.
music as
Yeah.
well. I'm trying to think of one. You know, did you ever think, or I don't know if they've ever classified this as a theme for Joan Bennett for her
Oh,
characters?
yes. Yeah.
Did they ever?
Elizabeth. Yep. Yep.
I always think of it as Elizabeth Stoddard's theme, and this isn't exactly it, but it's the kind of chords they were
Mm,
always kind of dour, and it's like there's an air of resignation to it, so it's kind of like something like that, where
yeah.
it's just there's nothing happy about it, and
No.
it's just like, oh,
Yes. It
and
really is.
that
Yeah.
was kind of the life that she had,
Hmm.
was that. But then I guess they infused it to all of her characters. And then there was one here, I actually have to just write this down, see if I could remember. Let's see which. Oh, I'm going to use the vibe, and I don't know if you would hear this, but every time that Catherine Lee Scott and most of her characters, you would get this kind of, that,
Yes. Yep.
that, and so I
Yeah.
always tended to call that Maggie Evans's theme because usually
Hmm.
when they played that, there wasn't anything bad that was going to happen at that point. It was almost kind of like you could relax a little bit, and it'd be like, Joe, can I pour you a cup of coffee, or something.
Yeah.
That. But it seemed I was kind of fascinated that it always they would always find a way to kind of play that. It
Hmm.
was like her own theme. So I don't know if that was grouped or cataloged in that way.
I know Elizabeth's definitely. It's just called Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, and it's on this album
Hmm.
too.
Ah,
Number 12. Now, Maggie's, that one is on here. It's on here, but I don't remember
hmm,
if it's identified as a theme for Maggie, or it might be Maggie and Joe. I
hmm.
know one of these albums I think has Maggie and Joe. I have to look through the listing, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and they would do that. There's also the David Collins. Anytime David was on screen, there was that. It was a childlike theme, but it was also infused with a sense of danger. Like immediately you hear that,
Hmm.
and it's like this kid's troubled. There's something, there's something a little off about this kid, because there's a mischievous quality to it, but there's a tension there that's whenever David's theme plays, it just has that feel to it. You know what I'm
I'm gonna
talking
have
about?
to listen. I'm gonna have to listen for that. It didn't jump out at me, but I
Yeah.
would love to. I'll bet that if someone pointed that out, I'd know.
I can't
What
replicate. It's like doo, doo. I can't do it. Same with Barnabas's. I can't hum it, but it's so it's, again, there's with Barnabas's theme, there's an otherness to it. There's
Mhm.
a supernatural kind of quality to it. And there's a hint of menace there, but also sadness and melancholy and longing. And I think the theme existed before Barnabas was on the show, but they started using it anytime Barnabas would talk, and he would
Mhm.
be talking about the past or something. You'd be like this kind of eerie
Yeah,
music.
it's
And they always,
the
yeah,
perfect underscore to things that he would say, and I think that
yeah,
also is kind of reflective of the brilliance of Bob Cobert in terms of
mhm,
what would be good to play under what somebody was saying.
yeah,
That would kind of complement their character and maybe bring it out without distracting from
mhm, absolutely, yeah. Um, Now, some of the other themes, I didn't put these in my like top 10, but I had to mention one was David's. Another one, which is just a straight up horror theme, is the Head of Judah Zachary
it.
music, which I
Mm.
believe was initially used in Dan Curtis's, I think it was Dead of Night. It was a TV movie he did. I think it was Dead, or Darkness That Blazed On. It was also called The Darkness That Blazed On. And I can't even, it's just, it gives you goosebumps when you listen to when the first time I heard that theme, there's a horn that kind of, you know what I'm talking about? It's just like,
Yeah.
I can't even,
Hmm.
it's almost like a growling kind of
Yeah,
sound.
it was almost like they were going to go after something that wasn't purely musical,
Yeah.
and just have kind of like an utterly horrific sound.
Yeah.
Uh,
It was an unpleasant sound to hear. And they
mhm.
did start playing it a bit too much at times because they could just get, I was like, but I loved it. And I mean, I love that theme, and it's just such a creepy theme music, you know.
Of course, you remember the theme they used for Sarah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I, I wish that I wish I had on this keyboard a flute setting, but I mean, I always remember that it was the kind of it was London Bridge, but in a minor key.
Yes.
That's uh, instead of let's see, but it's
Yeah.
so there's a mournful quality
Oh, I feel like
to
just listening to that, I want to cry. I mean, it's just
it.
it's just like,
Well,
oh.
and when you hear it on the recorded version, you get two flutes at one point
Mhm.
harmonizing with each other, which again gives it that kind of like mournful but yet otherworldly quality to it.
Oh yeah, he adds that na 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 na
Hmm.
na. It
Yeah,
just kind of keeps on going. Yeah, it's and it's very sad, very
and
sad.
notice the
It's on
melody
this.
that you were humming. I mean, it's these are kind of like odd intervals
Mhm.
that he was able to create and I think make it so memorable.
Absolutely, yeah. Another one that I really liked was the Eagle Hill Cemetery music. You know what I'm
Mhm.
talking? It goes I can't, it goes na, 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 na,
Oh
na,
yeah.
na, na. It's just
Hmm.
kind of just this
Yeah.
back and forth kind of sound, and it's just again it's just like a perfect theme music for for a cemetery. It's just like that's it. Any other ones jump to mind
Well,
for you?
one that it's just a music cue, but one thing that Bob Cobert did really well was um, the use of timpani,
Oh
so
yeah,
timpani drums there, and he would use it to kind of fill in something, or he would just have it by itself. So especially if somebody was being chased, I think that you just get these timpanis being played. But oftentimes he would just have it layered into whatever the orchestra was doing. And I think those famous dot dot da, those
yeah.
three notes that they do. There were variations of that, of course, but then there was one that I think they would always pull out when they just said when they were trying to tell you this is just absolutely shocking. If you're not shocked, you've got to be shocked. And it would always be kind of like that there.
Yep.
And of course, I don't have the whole orchestra for that, but he would get it with all the appropriate instrumentation. But it was that kind of like this is a shock. That's
That's
what
the
he's trying to
ultimate
tell you. The
shocking
ultimate,
one.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I know exactly the one you're talking. It's they
And,
used
and the
it.
thing and the thing about it is that when each of those notes, having heard it again the other night, you could hear that timpani there underneath it, so that
Mhm.
it just adds to the texture,
Yeah,
making it as shocking as it's as they're wanting you to feel.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, all of those great cliffhanger, stings that he did were just great. Some of them were like that, were shocking. And of course there's the bum bum bum. But then there's
Mhm.
also the ones that were just sort of eerie that were like, ooh, like it's just
Mhm.
like this
I think something
weird.
like uh, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't have, I don't, and maybe some musicians will go, it sounds like it, but I didn't actually have the scores for
Mhm.
these things, but I just picked it up just having heard it all these years.
Oh no, that's great. I mean,
And,
I would never be able to do what you just well, all of those things you're doing are just
but it's,
incredible to see.
it's amazing to really look at and hear just
Mhm.
what he was able to accomplish with all these moods that
Mhm.
he would create.
The timpani too, you mentioned, I just it comes to mind a few other ones that he did, like the Leviathans, where it's just starts out with boom, boom,
Mm-hmm.
boom, boom, and it's just like gradually builds up. And then the werewolf trends when Chris Jennings turns into a werewolf, it's like it's like
Hmm.
frenetic and crazy, but you can hear the timpani drum in there,
Right.
plus all these other instruments that are it's just has a feral quality to it, you know, which as it should, you know.
I kind of wonder what the perspective would be. I don't know if they've ever been interviewed, but some of the musicians in the orchestra that played on the recording sessions for these things,
Oh, that would be interesting. I
what would
don't
they do?
know.
And I wouldn't be surprised if, if they just walked in and actually, if they were studio quality musicians, they could walk in and just read it and, not necessarily know what this is going to be for.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know if this is, on the order of like Wrecking Crew kinds of musicians where they'd have no idea what the song was. Hal Blaine, the famous drummer, would not know what song he was playing on until he actually heard it on the radio. He just came in and they said, "Here's what we want you to do," and
Yeah.
then they'd add the vocals later. But who knew what group they were doing it for?
Yeah.
One other sound, and again, I don't have the flute here, flute setting, but there was a lot of flute
Yes.
show. And I think it created something that at the same time was both uh, calming, kind of almost aquatic, but yet disturbing. And Bob Cobert gave a lot of opportunities for flute underscores, where it was the flute was the lead instrument
Yeah.
in defining the mood.
100%. Yeah. I for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So many of the themes from the show used flute. Yeah. Um,
There was one, I wish I could remember exactly what it was called, but it also had a lot of kind of like water effects in there. I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about, but
what
oftentimes they would blend
is
it
it the
in.
is it the one
There
in the
was some kind of
courtyard?
percussion. There was some kind of percussion underneath the flute, which gave you felt like you were, kind of at a pond somewhere.
Is it the
Uh,
one they used in the courtyard, like in the courtyard outside Collinwood with the when the fountain, you know, and the romantic scenes at the fountain, or
Well, that would be an actual water sound.
yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Oh,
But
okay.
it would be like you'd be in a room, maybe David and and who was the other little girl? Now I'm blanking on her
Oh,
name.
Amy Jennings.
Amy, yes. So they'd be like in the secret room or something, and you'd hear flute and some kind of watery type sound going on there as well.
I wonder if we're thinking of the David theme here.
It could be,
That might be it.
yeah.
It's I can't hum it. I wish I could. It's that one is difficult to I can't really do it. I'll send it. Maybe I'll look it up, and if I can find it, I'll send it your way. Um, any other themes that come to mind for you that you wanna bring up here?
I'm trying to remember. I think we already covered Back at the Blue Whale, didn't we?
Mhm.
Didn't I do that
Yep.
earlier?
Yep.
That was really a fun one there that I think just really showed the versatility of Bob.
Mhm.
Uh, but uh, I think that pretty much
Okay.
covered the ones that were on my list.
Yeah. One that was unusual that isn't on my list, but it jumped to mind is it's the transformation. In fact, it's on, I think it's volume 4 of the Media Sound Records. It's the transformation music for Cyrus Longworth and John Yeager. When he transforms, it's like this dun, 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 dun,
Right.
dun, dun. It's like this,
Mhm.
this tension is building up as he's about to, drink this potion. And then when he turns into Yeager, there's this
Yeah.
sound.
Mhm.
And then when he
I think that
becomes,
didn't that kind of blend with they found a way to blur the picture and
yes.
they made it kind of like wavy.
Yep, yeah,
And
and
that
they did this strange kind of kaleidoscopy kind of thing, and then it blurred, and then he becomes Jaeger, but then the music turns into this like jazzy, sleazy saxophone music. I
yeah,
can't just imitate it, but
I know what you're talking about.
yeah, it's like where did that come from? Okay, it's like a saxophone on Dark Shadows. But it's the perfect for Jaeger. It's like this kind of crazy, sleazy kind of saxophone music. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
that kind of works for that character though. So again, I don't know if that was something that Dan Curtis asked Cobert to compose specifically for that because I think the science the initial music the when he's I think they might have used that during the Adam storyline, but then the saxophone stuff I think was new. I don't remember hearing that prior to that storyline.
One thing I was going to mention was that Bob Cobert's career musically before Dark Shadows was, very an unlikely career. Part of it included composing themes to TV game shows.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so it was really something when when I was reading his bio, and I don't know if your fans would recognize this one. Does that sound familiar?
Well, we talked about it before before
Oh,
we
you gave it
recorded.
away.
So
Well, to tell the truth.
yeah.
So I didn't realize that he had done that. And every time I hear that now, I kept thinking, what does that remind me of? And because it was sort of that was the vibe, was the lead instrument, I think, on that. And it always reminded me of being in a department store,
Yeah.
because you
Oh
hear those
yeah.
chimes
Yes. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. For
on there.
sure.
But then he also did Password.
Hmm.
And then I discovered fairly recently, because I guess one of the game show networks was rerunning the old Price is Right with Bill Cullen. And
Oh.
when you saw the credits running at the very end, I had no idea. But then all of a sudden, it was just Bob Cobert, and I'm going, "Oh wow, this is Bob Cobert," and that would have dated back to maybe around 1959, 1960.
Oh wow.
So, I really wonder what else had been going on in terms of, I haven't really read anything extensive about his background, but he did go to Juilliard, and and he had his career already in television. So I'm just trying to think of what the connection was that he had with Dan Curtis to be able to, fulfill Dan's dream, his vision of the music being such an integral character of Dark Shadows.
What did you think of Joanna's theme, the theme from Night of Dark Shadows?
Well, that was very pretty, and it's certainly
Mm.
very elegant. I'm trying to remember exactly what it sounds like now, uh,
Yeah.
but that's something that I can kind of recall in the distance, but I don't have it really at the tip of my memory
Yeah,
right
it's something where again, it's a very different. They used it in the show, but I don't think they had the harmonica part of it in the show. It was more just the piano for Joanna's theme. And they use it in Night of Dark Shadows. I know a lot of people sometimes I've heard people not really like that they use that in Night of Dark Shadows, but I think it works to set that kind of
now. Something like this. Is
yeah.
that how it started? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yep.
Mhm.
I think I always say this. I'm like, that's sets the mood for that film. If you're watching that on a rainy day in
Mhm.
like November or something, like really gray, rainy day, that music just fits that mood perfectly. It's just such a
He had a way of really evoking melancholy, and at least the
mhm.
few times I've seen him in at conventions or speaking, he seems like a pretty, seemed like a pretty jolly guy.
Yeah,
Kind of evoke all of these moods, especially dark ones.
yeah.
Uh, that must, you kind of wonder what was his thought process and what did he draw from?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, any interview I've ever seen with Robert Cobert, jolly is a great
Yeah.
word to describe him. He seemed to have a great sense of humor,
Mhm.
joking with the fans, and being very playful and stuff. And yeah, that is interesting that he could kind of tap into whatever that reservoir to create this kind of melancholy, somber music. Um, if now, of course, there's potentially there's going to be a new Dark Shadows with a Dark Shadows reincarnation. What would you like to see in that in terms of themes? Would you like to hear the original themes reimagined, or all new stuff, or a combination? How would you feel about that?
That's really difficult to say because, they've tried different times to revive it or to do different things with it. And I guess it's very hard to beat everything that converged in, between 1966 and 71. Um, they could try reimagining it, but then you kind of, I don't know, and I don't know if it's because I'm almost, or I am kind of an original fan, but there was so much that the original music captured that's very difficult. It's like
Yeah,
lightning in a bottle. How do
yeah,
make the lightning strike again? It's very hard to do, but I'm sure that there are ways they could um, reimagine it. I think, interestingly, Marlo Thomas, the star of
sure.
that
That
girl,
girl, yeah, yeah.
uh, she was commenting on the DVD reissue of the series about how like half of their plot lines, if they were being shot today, would be utterly preposterous and completely unrealistic because of a cell phone. You know, it's like, where's Ann and Don? So, well, if they had
Yeah.
a cell phone, they'd call right away. And so, you know, Maggie or Vicky walking through the woods, you know, what happened? They're not here yet.
Yeah.
And so the point is, how would you have different storylines that would capture what happened in Dark Shadows when a lot of what was going on there was because somebody was missing.
Yeah.
They couldn't find them, and a cell phone, unless you know, would Quentin be haunting a cell phone? I mean, I'm not sure how,
Yeah.
you know, how well would that be received?
When I interviewed Mark B. Perry, who's the spearheading this Dark Shadows reincarnation that he's pitching to the streaming channels, I mentioned that, and the 2004 pilot that what they did for WB, there's no cell phone service in Collinsport. It
Mm,
doesn't, and had this very similar idea. And Collinwood, the grounds surrounding Collinwood, mysteriously, there's just the signal. There's no, you can't use cell phone. It won't
mm.
work. So you could kind of just that supernatural aura, I guess, surrounding Collinwood, maybe.
Or you know, this just literally occurred to me. I wonder if you just set the show back in the 60s or 70s again.
Sure, you could do that too. Yeah,
Do you need to have it set in contemporary time?
right.
I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean they could. They certainly could. The I was surprised with the I tried not to mention I have gone on record I'm not a fan of the film, but I Danny
Me neither.
Elfman, yeah. I was surprised that Danny Elfman didn't do the theme from the series. The dark He used one of Cobert's themes. It was kind of one of the Laura kind of themes, which are great themes too, the ones they use for Laura Collins. But he used one of Cobert's themes, but he didn't use the Dark Shadows theme in the film. But I guess it has very little in common
Yeah, I
with
mean,
Dark Shadows.
the thing I would say about that the 2012 movie was that all the hype leading up to it, they were all fans of the show, and
Yes.
they really wanted to do a loving tribute. And I thought, well, then maybe that could work. But then there was really nothing about it that appealed to me,
Hmm.
and it 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 wasn't it didn't capture the original series. If they were trying to do a spoof, maybe that might have worked, but then it didn't really, you know, there
Yeah.
wasn't anything funny about it, so it just it didn't hit any of the notes with me. And I know that there are others here that loved it,
Hmm.
and that really were captivated by it, and they thought, "Oh, this is perfect." But I guess to each, you know, his own
Yeah.
taste.
What did you think about the music? Danny Elfman's music for the
Uh,
film.
not it didn't really strike me. It
Same
didn't have
here.
that much of an effect on me. And I really went there with uh, not knowing what to expect, but I certainly wasn't expecting to be as disappointed,
Oh,
perhaps, as it
y-
was.
yeah, yeah. Same. It's interesting too because Danny Elfman's themes over the years tend to be very memorable.
Sure.
The themes that he's done. So I was surprised that he didn't do a version of Cobert's title theme for Dark Shadows, and B, that none of the music is particularly like jumped out at me as being like sticking in my head. So
Mhm.
I don't know what happened there, but I'm hopeful that if there is something else that happens with Dark Shadows in terms of this sequel series that is coming ostensibly, that it would be. I know Mark is very much a hardcore fan of the original series. If you listen to that episode, he's very
Mm.
much, I think he'll do it justice. And he did mention doing like a new version, doing the Dark Shadows theme, but a new version of it for the new show. So
I
uh,
haven't been following the news on that closely, but is that pretty much a certainty that that they're actually going to have that? Has that been green lighted?
no, he's still shopping it to
Hmm.
streaming networks. I think there's been some movement on it recently because he's been posting again about it. And I believe he'd still He said, "I'm still climbing up. I'm still climbing up to I'm still climbing Widow's Hill." He says, He- so he's
Maybe maybe Peacock or Tubi or one of those.
that's what
Uh,
I'm thinking,
yeah,
or
would be a
Hulu.
possibility.
I mean, there are so many of these streaming channels now out there that Shutter maybe would be one that there's so many options. Like, why not give Dark Shadows another shot? I agree with you that it's lightning in a bottle. You can never recapture the original, but a sequel, I
How
think
many episodes do you know would they want to do? Would this be like a weekly or would this be occasionally?
it's a how they do these streaming shows now. They'll do
Oh, 7 or 10 episodes and
yeah, and
okay.
then you have to wait for the next
Mhm.
season, and then they'll drop another 10. Some channels like Hulu does one a week, and they'll do
Mhm.
like 9 episodes or something. Netflix drops them all at once. Like they'll do
Mhm.
something like a Stranger Things or something, and they'll drop them all at once. It's tough with Dark Shadows is a serialized gothic tale, so I think it's you have to kind of reimagine it, I guess, to be it would still be serialized, but it would only be like that set number of episodes for a season, and then you'd have to wait for the next season. But so many of these shows are doing this now. I don't know. I don't know if they could. I wish it would be just like an ongoing thing, like the original one, where you could keep it going. But nobody's ever done a sequel show before, so it's always a reboot, a remake of the original, and it'd be interesting to see a next generation kind of take on it. But I do
Yeah,
hope some of the themes are retained. Yeah,
yeah, and I think also one other thing that's hard to capture, and you can't really be intentional about trying to recreate it or even create it, is the charm. I mean,
yeah,
the original show had a charm about it, and it was just because of the way everything fell together, as well as all the limitations. Because when you don't have a really high budget and you can only do one taping, it's basically live on tape.
yeah,
The show would come out the way it did, then it created a certain uh, attitude in the actors that, and most of them being stage actors, really were able to perform kind of big on the small screen.
yeah.
And it worked, it worked out well, in the vast majority of the episodes as watch and rewatch them again.
Mm,
And then even the pre-Barnabas episodes I thought were really, very elegantly and it had a polish of its own, even though that these were all essentially done live, and especially even Joan Bennett fluffing a line, and you can tell that she didn't like that she fluffed that line, but
mm.
you kind of go with it because you know what they're up against, and you enjoy it.
Right.
Although I'm sure she probably just, would just shudder. You can tell when she shudders that
Yeah. Yes.
she missed something or that, but yet, even she was okay with it because she knew. I mean, you can't be perfect,
Yeah.
uh, but it certainly worked.
And it
And I
had
don't know if
a
you, yeah, I don't know if you can accomplish that if you have to reshoot anything.
right. It had
But
that theatrical quality to it, but also that summer stock, but with even less time to rehearse it. It's just sort of there was that. I mean, it wasn't spontaneous because it was written and they did a couple of rehearsals and a read through rehearsal and then taped it, but it was almost at that point where there was that spontaneity, that energy to it was coming, certainly coming through, I think. And you have these amazing theater actors and scripts written by these great playwrights who are just, Sam Hall, who's very witty, and Gordon Russell, and who's great at plotting out storylines. Violet Wells, who's great at writing character dialogue, and you got Joe Caldwell, who's just a great, playwright and writing these great scripts. So the combination of talent, in addition to the music of Robert Cobert, just it came together and converged to create this one of a kind thing. So it is, I think that's part of why it's so difficult to recapture or do a remake or anything of Dark Shadows, because
well,
that's part of Dark Shadows. Yeah.
and even more amazing is the number of times, at least from what I've read, where they would have to rewrite or make changes, like right before air or an
Yeah.
hour before air. So you've already rehearsed it one way, but then they need you to do something else a different way, or maybe come down the stairs when you say that line, or skip this line, or yeah, I mean, all of that you have to keep in your head
Yeah.
and make it work
Yeah.
when the red light goes on.
Yeah, it's amazing that they were able to pull it off. And I think, that said, I am still eager to see. I would like to see more Dark Shadows. Or I'd like to see Dark Shadows continue to be perpetuated in the um, cultural consciousness. I guess that's I would like. I something new would also bring attention to the original show too, and I'd like that to continue to be perpetuated. New
Yeah, me
merchandise,
too.
new. Mhm.
It's just unfortunately, as time passes, of course, the original actors are not
Yeah,
with us, and so I guess it becomes more difficult to try to figure out ways to create a new event.
yeah,
It might have to be with a different generation. I'm really not sure, and I think that I just don't know if we'll be able to do like full-blown conventions. I mean, we were at the 50th anniversary one. I don't know if you were you at that one?
you know what? I tried to go and I wrote into the festival and they said it was sold out. I couldn't
Oh,
go. Yeah. In the 2016 festival in
mhm.
New York, I posted it on Facebook. It's like,
Oh,
I can't go. I guess I waited too long probably to write in because they were still doing the Sazy thing. Like you write in to the
mm.
festival with a self-addressed stamped envelope with a check and all of that. And, but yeah,
Yeah, we were
I didn't know.
lucky. We were lucky to get in,
Yeah.
and I think in some of the video footage you can see the back of our head of the audience. And I think there was one other time. I think it was either on one of the festival days or right after, where we went and we just were compelled, since we were going to be in Manhattan also for a couple of days. We went over by the building, the original the studio where they had the original uh, tapings there.
Mhm.
And I think that building had not yet. I think it's been torn down
I think so.
since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we happened to be walking by and we were across the street, Catherine Lee Scott happened to be coming out
Oh.
with a film crew, and then we just had this kind of a conversation across the street because she was wondering if we were one of the original kids that would come around there and wait, which we weren't.
Yeah.
But it was kind of a fun, opportunity there. So that we're actually, if you freeze the frame on one of the, I think it was I don't know if it was the Dan Curtis um, documentary, but it's in one of the shots there where if you freeze the frame, you'll see us, my partner and I from across the street,
Oh, wow. Oh,
waving,
I'll have to keep
waving
an
at,
eye out for that.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, don't blink.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I'll definitely have to rewatch that and look for that. Yeah, I've made it to two festivals. And I loved both times I went, and I wish, in retrospect, I had gone to more of them, but I did make it to two, and I'm glad that I did. But
Yeah,
I
which
would,
ones did you go to?
gosh, it was 2000. I think I went to 2009 and 2006, I want to say. I pull out the programs, but they were the New York. They were the New York, and not the West Coast ones. They were the East Coast ones.
Mhm.
So yeah, so maybe
So I was at 2001, uh,
mhm.
2002, which was at I think at Burbank or at Anaheim,
Okay,
and then the 50th anniversary one
yeah.
in 2016.
But yeah, oh, that's great that you got to make it to that. And I know what you're saying. I think and I asked Catherine Lee Scott about that, about doing a new festival or new convention. And it's what, as you pointed out, a lot of the actors are getting older, and it's, can be difficult with travel, and especially with COVID and stuff. Even though we're coming out of that, it's still, still difficult,
I know they were
for,
trying to do cruises, but I think that's not somewhat limiting in
yeah,
terms of who would go and how much time would you have to be able to spend
for,
with having not being able to go anywhere else while you were there.
yeah. Yeah, definitely, and it's pricey to do a cruise too, so but, anyway, Ben, well, I appreciate you joining me today to discuss the music of Robert Cobert.
Oh, it's been
I
a blast, Danielle.
Oh
I
gosh,
appreciate
it's
it.
so much fun, and I hope we get to meet in person. They do have, Bob does have these smaller, events at Seaview, so perhaps
Yeah.
we'll meet there at some point.
He's been nagging me to go, and maybe one of these years we'll be able to make it.
Oh, yeah, it's cool.
It's tough at this time of the year, I think, as you know, because those
Yeah.
of us who are teaching, it's very difficult to get away, especially when it's in that narrow window of what I have to do, and that's, I think it's hard, especially in, October,
Yeah, and you'd have to
holiday.
travel out this way too, so that's
But I
that.
know he's done a, fabulous job being able to kind of keep the memory alive and to maintain that community, that Dark Shadows community.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you there.
As
Um,
are you,
uh,
because of your podcasts.
well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Thank you. And folks, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Terror at Collinwood. If you enjoyed the episode, please do be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you won't miss any episodes. We have lots of great shows coming up, and also be sure to rate, review, and please, if you're watching the YouTube version, as this version of this episode will have a YouTube video to go along with it, please do make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I will have some exclusive content coming, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for listening. And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.